Good morning, it's Deborah from Embody Nature and I am a trauma and emotional regulation coach. Welcome back. If you're coming back time and time again, I love connecting with you and hearing your thoughts during the week. And if this is your first time, this is a space that we can talk about the patterns that hold underneath our relationships and how we turn up in those spaces. So today we're talking about why we love the way we do, understanding trauma, attachment and the brain. So can I ask you something? Have you ever walked away from an argument or a disagreement and thought, why did I react like that? Or maybe you promised yourself, next time I'll stay calm, sort of only to find yourself shutting down and becoming defensive or people pleasing or saying things that you later regret. So if that's you, comment me below, put your thumbs up, send some love. I know I'm not alone in this because today I want to explain something that completely changed the way I saw myself and my relationships. You're probably not reacting because you're broken. You're reacting because your nervous system learned how to survive a certain way. So many people believe their relationship problems are communication problems, but communication is usually the symptom. So the real issue is normally that you've got two nervous systems, often if they've experienced trauma. So you've got two heightened nervous systems and they're both trying to protect themselves at the same time. So what you kind of often see is one partner is stepping into the space and sort of pursuing the other, and the other partner withdraws. This one partner becomes angry, the other partner shuts down. One person people pleases and the next looks for reassurance. One needs space and the other person is kind of left feeling misunderstood. And I guess it's interesting because if we start looking at attachment theory, probably 50% of people have a healthy attachment, and the rest of us, including me, have an attachment pattern that means that we are going to struggle. And we often are attracted to other people with patterns that aren't those secure attachments. So we actually find ourselves replaying a lot of those, I guess, dramas from our childhood, or these patterns that somehow feel really comfortable for us, but might not be particularly healthy for us. But what's happening with these two people is neither of them is trying to hurt the other. They're actually just trying to protect themselves. And unless we understand where those protective patterns come from, we are just going to keep on repeating these patterns over and over again. Because have you ever noticed it might be a different argument about a different thing, but it is often the same patterns that are sort of underpinning it all the way. So if we can actually look under the surface and change the patterns, that's where the stuff on the top starts to look different. So instead of trying to fix the behavior, we're looking for what's underneath, what's in that subconscious space. And if we can fix that, which is normally those feelings or those unmet needs, we can really start to shift the needle a bit. So developmental trauma, so many of us have experienced developmental trauma. There's been studies around people who've experienced adverse childhood experiences, and, the statistics are generally around 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 of us have had significant childhood trauma of some way. So that's quite a lot of us walking around the world either wounded or healing from being wounded. And I think sometimes people hear the word trauma and they think of those big events. But developmental trauma isn't so much about what happened. Sometimes it's about what didn't happen. So it's those patterns that were repeated in our childhood over and over again. Maybe as a child, we didn't feel seen. We didn't feel emotionally safe. We weren't feeling like we were comforted or responded to in the way that we needed. We might have grown up walking on eggshells, not sure when our caregiver was going to switch, and we just had to be really hyper vigilant around that. We might have felt responsible for everybody else's emotions. We might have been grown up around a lot of criticism. Hi Zach, welcome. Thanks for the love. So we might, have found ourselves being ignored. All of these childhood needs, if they weren't met over and over and over again, this can lead to developmental trauma. We can also experience trauma from neurodiversity in growing up in a world that didn't fit us. That can actually create some trauma too. So while I acknowledge all the big traumas that people have experienced, often I have clients come to me and they're like, I didn't realize I actually had trauma until I started unpacking it. And when we talk about it, they really relate to it. So all of these experiences and these unmet needs teach a child's nervous system that this is what love feels like. But the incredible thing is children don't question their caregivers or their caregivers' capacity. They actually question themselves. So what they do is adapt and they judge themselves for all the things that are happening around them. So understanding the brain can really help us make a good start in shifting how we feel and how we react. So I really love the brain model that Dan Siegel uses, the hand model, because if we think about the brain, we can talk about sort of an upstairs and downstairs brain. So in this downstairs part of the brain, we have our fight and flight. So when we're calm, everything's looking good. But when we are stressed, we might find there's the fight and flight, this primitive part of the brain. And then we've got our emotion center. So if we imagine this is our emotion center, and then if we imagine this is our clever part of the brain, our cortex, and the bit at the front, neocortex. And this is where all our executive functioning happens, all the clever stuff, how we regulate our emotions, how we think, our language centers. There's a whole lot of stuff that happens in this space. So when we're calm, the world looks good, and we can respond in ways. We can be thoughtful, we can be caring, we can show up in the ways that we want to. But when we, what Dan Siegel calls flip our lid, and this is when we experience stress, and then we lose that connection to that top part of the brain. So what we're left with is this downstairs, this bottom part of the brain. And so all we've got is emotions, and then we've got our fight, our flight, our freeze, and our fawn response. And that's all we're playing with. For kids, really young children, they don't even have this top part of the brain. So, we wonder why toddlers, just are a crazy ball of emotions. That is literally because that's all they've got is their survival part of their brain and their emotion center. And they just ping against each other all day long. So when our lid is flipped, logic goes out the window. But what tends to happen is when one of us in relationship flips our lid, it's great if the other person can help regulate and co-regulate and help by connection to bring us back down again and regulate. But what happens more times than not, whether it's with our partner or whether it's with our kids, is somebody flips their lid and it triggers us, and we flip our lid as well. And so we've got two people who are functioning off this bottom part of the brain. And that is not a place where we're going to solve the world's problems. We're not going to solve our relationship issues, because until we can bring our lids back down again, and that happens through connection and through calming, and sometimes that can be like taking a walk, it could be having a cold drink, it could be somebody, patting us on the back and saying it's going to be okay, and then we find we can kind of calm down again and regulate our system. So when we're sitting in this fight state, what does it look like? Well, I might become angry, I might become critical, I might become controlling and defensive. So sometimes what that looks like is somebody has been, it's almost like they've been storing away in their filing cabinet all the things that piss them off, about you. And then they might just do this hyper attack of criticism and just tell you all the things they don't like about you. And you always, and this is when you hear this strong anger coming through to you. And that can be the fight. It doesn't always have to be violence. Yay, Zach, thanks so much. The flight can look like avoidance. So it can be that pushing away. I need to take some time to step back from myself because I'm not coping. Somebody can go really quiet. They can't think. They can't talk. Sometimes they can't ask for their needs. They can't even think through what they need in this moment. That's our freeze response. And our fawn is I keep everyone happy. I might say yes. I might lose myself or avoid the conflict. So that's that kind of people-pleasing stuff. So there isn't really a good or a bad one, and we sometimes flip between using different ones depending on the situation. They're all really brilliant survival adaptations. The problem is they often continue after we actually need them. So if we're thinking about attachment, our earliest relationships then become that blueprint for our later ones. So if love for you felt safe as a child, you probably learned that I can trust people, I matter, conflict can be repaired. But if love felt unpredictable, you might have learned that I have to earn love, or I need to keep the peace, I need to keep everybody happy, or I can't, my needs aren't worth it. It's actually more important that I stay safe than have my needs met. And that safety can end up looking like unsafety to us. Like we might think we are keeping ourselves safe, but we sometimes keep ourselves in relationship with people who aren't safe, and we need to actually step away from that. So yeah, there might have been a lot of things that went on for us. We might have felt like we weren't good enough in our parent-child relationship, and so this carries on through us. And then when we get in relationships, we've got this blueprint, and the relationship then becomes the place where we keep those beliefs alive and keep them activated in our world, because we don't have any other way of doing it just yet. So I guess, this is where why I do the things that I do and I work in this space, is I realized for a long time that I had these relationship blueprints, and they still come up for me all the time. But what I've learned to do is to see them and to respond to them, and rather than reacting to them, and give myself a bit of space in between when something happens and how I respond or react. So for a long time, I just didn't understand why, and I didn't even really think to understand why I reacted the way I did in relationships. I just thought it was who I was. I was the person who would be the first one to complain about something. I would, if something felt like my rights were being infringed, I'd let you know. All really good qualities. But then if I got in an argument, I would be the one to sort of sit in the space and become bigger to make the other person listen. And if the other person got bigger, we'd just get bigger together, and we wouldn't be able to leave that cycle really easily. And I guess I knew that wasn't healthy, but I never stopped to think about where it came from and why I responded the way I did. As a child, I grew up in a home where criticism was really common. My dad was really critical of my mum, and he would, as he was being really critical, I would often insert myself in there as that protective role and really try to protect my mum. But what I could actually see is that both the parents would then unite against me, and I would be the problem. Instead, it was almost too much for them to sit in that space that either of them were the problem. So then it would all get thrown onto me. But what I really reflected on, I've been reflecting on lately, is that my father learnt these from his own father, who was extraordinarily critical. The things he used to say about my nan would just make, me cringe. You don't talk about people like that. So as a little girl, though, hearing those words and seeing that behavior over and over again, my nervous system learnt this must just be the way it is. And it learnt some powerful lessons that particularly trying to be the peacekeeper actually blew up in my face all the time. I learned that conflict wasn't emotionally safe, and I learned that standing up for someone could actually make me feel alone. So, I was constantly learning to scan the room, to read people's moods and try to anticipate what might happen next. I guess, and at the same time, I experienced childhood trauma that left me feeling like no one was there to protect me, and I couldn't always keep myself physically safe. So I learned to protect myself emotionally and psychologically instead. So my nervous system became incredibly good at surviving. I became independent very early. By the time I was around 11 or 12, I was cooking my own meals. I was making as many decisions as I could. I was out there doing things that were probably a bit unsafe for somebody my age, but I was figuring out life, I felt like, for myself. I don't remember feeling like I had an adult in my corner that I could lean on emotionally. Practically, I had adults and they were there for me, but I just don't think in that era parents had the capacity themselves to be emotionally present and supportive, to teach us those skills. At least mine didn't. I think there's some beautiful parents out there that did this amazingly, and I think they've given their kids an incredibly good head start. So what did I do? I stopped sharing and inserting myself into spaces. I kept things to myself. I became hyper independent, and I started to learn that I didn't need anyone. So for years, personality trait. I thought I was just being independent. I thought I was just emotional, and people would say that, and I'd notice that. I'd just like when things, when my lid flipped, I would become hyper emotional, and I'd have these really big emotions, and most people couldn't sit comfortably in them. So I learned that that was a bad thing, and I had to try to suppress that where I could. But I guess what I understand now as character flaws, I realized they were survival adaptations. My nervous system had spent years learning to be safe, and I have to thank myself for that because I really kept myself safe. I'm here. So it wasn't until adulthood, particularly towards the end of my marriage and as my marriage finished and I moved into new relationships, that I started recognizing the same patterns repeating over and over. And I had some really great relationship counseling that pointed out some of these cycles as well. So I'd walk away from some of these conversations. Why did I react like I did? And that is not who I wanted to be. And there started to be a big gap between the person that I saw myself as being and who I wanted to be and the person I was showing up as. And I really needed to bridge that gap, because the bigger the gap you have between those two personas, the more stress that you experience in life, because it's just such an identity chasm that really needs to be bridged. So I guess that was when I understood something profound, that this really wasn't about whatever disagreement was happening. It was about the patterns that were decades old, that were just cycling through my nervous system over and over again. So the more that I've learned about trauma over the years, and as well as, through learning for myself and through teaching, learning about attachment and the brain, it gave me language for how for the way that I'd lived, and it helped me stop seeing myself as broken and started seeing myself with so much more compassion. And when you can see yourself with compassion, you can break that shame cycle that ultimately leads to more anger and hurt going on in your system, and makes you dysregulate even more. And I guess then I went through the journey of healing through neurotransformation therapy, as well as some other subconscious therapies. And I discovered something even more profound. Understanding my patterns was the very beginning, but teaching my nervous system that it was finally safe was what truly changed things for me. And that is why I'm so passionate about the work I do. And I know what it's like to believe that you're the problem. And I also know the freedom that comes with realizing, being on the other side of this journey and realizing I'm not broken, that I simply adapted. And the beautiful thing about adaptation is that with safety, awareness, and the right support, this can change. So this is exactly why I'm so passionate about my work and neurotransformation therapy, because information alone doesn't create the transformation that we're looking for. Most of us already know I shouldn't react like I do, I shouldn't shut down, I shouldn't people please, but knowing isn't enough, because the patterns don't live in our thinking brain, they live in our subconscious and they live in our nervous system. And they were learnt before we even had language. So NTT helps us gently access those subconscious patterns and to update them. So instead of simply managing the triggers, we begin healing the beliefs underneath them. So when the nervous system can feel safe, everything changes. Communication changes, relationships change for you, parenting changes, because we're no longer reacting in that survival state. We are responding from connection. And connection, my friends, is the opposite of trauma, because trauma can help us feel really disconnected. So I'd love you to grab a journal this week and simply reflect on these questions. What did conflict look like growing up? What messages did I learn about love? How was affection shown? What made me feel safe? Which survival response do I notice most today? There's no right or wrong answers. This is just curiosity, because awareness is always that first step towards healing. Because when you look at the answers to those questions, there'll be some understanding of how that relates to you now in your relationships. So I truly believe that every relationship challenge is an invitation not to blame ourselves, not to blame our partner, but to understand ourselves more deeply, because once we understand the patterns, we can begin changing them. So over the next few weeks, I am going to be taking you through this journey of understanding attachment, the nervous system, regulation, emotional safety, conflict, and connection. And if you are someone who's tired of repeating the same relationship patterns, if you've done the reading, you've listened to the podcast, you've tried to communicate differently, but you still find yourself reacting in ways that you don't understand, I would love to help. So this is exactly the work I do through my neurotransformation therapy and relationship coaching. So together, we don't just talk about your patterns, we gently uncover where they began. So help your nervous system feel safe again and create that lasting change that you're looking for. So if this resonates with you, DM me, chuck the word relate in if you feel like it, or just say hi, and let's have a conversation and see what healing could look like for you. And if today's session helped you understand yourself a little better, I'd love it if you would share this with somebody that you think would really love to hear this message, someone you care about. Because the more we understand our nervous system, the more compassion we can bring into all of our relationships. So we've got a beautiful day in Adelaide. It's beautiful and sunny, and I've been out in Belair, so I hope you can get out. I hope it's sunny where you are, and I hope you have a fantastic day. See ya.